And as soon as the NCBA picks up the phone and says, Vance, we don't like that you did that, I'm going to be like, all right, well, send your president on. Let's have him on. And I'm going to just keep trying to bring as many different tribes as I can from all different directions.
Find whatever they want and all of a sudden say I got explosives, and then it becomes tacked on the charge. This is how insane it is. And I'm trying not to be too flamboyant, except it just happened. And to tack that on, I had the Premier of Alberta on yesterday. And, I think one of my listeners said it best, if she wants a second career after politics, she could become a tap instructor, because she kind of tiptoed and tapped around all the questions, including the Coutts Four.
The answer seems obvious. It is that the government wants to make sure that people are afraid to protest, that they are afraid that, if they have even a 22 in their vehicle, that like their whole life could be ripped out of their hands.
But I'm pretty pissed right now, and frankly, I'm not going to let some, Justin Trudeau, got a couple of choice words in my head, intimidate me, my family, my country into a place that we don't want to go, because it is a strange world, and I think you go into that strange world further, and that's your own sort of bag over your head, live in hell that nobody wants to be a part of. So, hey, this is Shaun Newman, host of the SMP here in the Great White North, and you're listening to the one and only Vance Crow Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today, Canadian podcaster Shaun Newman returns. Longtime listeners of the podcast know that Shaun is one of my most frequent guests, and it's because we're brothers from another mother. I actually love talking with Shaun. He has an energy and an excitement and a zest for life that is truly unparalleled by anyone else. He also is living up in Canada, where he talks about, with his guests and his audience, about the news that's going on in Canada. And Shaun has become a major force in Canadian politics, particularly out west. Just before he hopped on to record this interview, he was with the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. We talk a little bit about that, what it's like to interview a premier, what kind of questions he was asking, and how she dodged those questions. We also talked about the Coutts Four, which, if you're not familiar with that name, you should be. Those were 4 men that were arrested in Canada and kept locked up for over 900 days before they finally had their day in court. Shaun talks all about how their conviction played out, and you will probably be shocked by what you hear here. We also, throughout this podcast, talk more about politics than I normally do. One thing you may have realized is I very seldom tell my political views. Largely, it's because I think political views aren't that interesting. What really matters is, what are you contributing to the world? What are you actively engaged in? And so I don't like talking about who I voted for or, kind of the upcoming elections, but it's very interesting to talk about what are the consequences of an election now. Are we headed towards a nuclear war? And do I think, all the way down in the deep recesses of my heart, that this is the best system that we could have, this democracy of our country? I think you're going to enjoy this podcast. At the end, we end up talking a little bit about Bitcoin, and that prompts me to talk about a recording I did with a man named Jay Curtis, who came down to do a legacy interview and then asked me to help him take Bitcoin off of an exchange and put onto a wallet. So I mentioned during the interview that we have recorded a video of us doing this so that you can learn too, so that you could get a Trezor wallet, you could buy Bitcoin on an exchange, and you could put it onto your wallet. You can find that video by going to legacyinterviews.com/Bitcoin, where you'll see a video of Jay and I walking through the steps. I hope you'll enjoy it. We're going to get to the interview with Shaun Newman in just a moment, but first I want to talk about legacy interviews. Longtime listeners of the podcast know that legacy interviews are where I sit down with your loved ones to record them telling their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family history. One thing that comes to mind when thinking about Shaun Newman is how many Canadians have actually done legacy interviews. I offer the service online for people that can't travel to the St. Louis studio, and this has opened up a window into a world that I never imagined. In fact, I've had people now do legacy interviews over our online system here, and they started life in a house with dirt floors, or didn't have electricity, or had to get water from a well. These people that are out there that experienced their parents hitching horses in order to be able to go out and plow fields, or had to actually shell the corn themselves, these people aren't going to last forever. And eventually we will hit a point in our society where it is a distant memory where people ever lived without electricity at all. So if you have a loved one that has had these experiences, they lived a life that was before all of this technology, and you want to make sure that you capture their wisdom so that you can talk about what was life like back then, what did technology cost us in terms of community and family, and what should we be mindful of in the future, then go to legacyinterviews.com and book a legacy interview online for your loved one. This is a profound experience, and while the studio is always the best because you're in person, online has turned out to be an amazing ability to be able to capture these stories, be able to get people's feelings and emotions and interactions with the world, that I think it's an awesome option as well. So, legacyinterviews.com, check it out. And now on to the interview with my good friend, Shaun Newman. Shaun Newman, welcome back to the podcast.
Vance, bleeping crow, how's it go?
It's going great. So you are my Canadian friend. I have a few of you guys, but you're the one that has a podcast that talks all the time about the Coutts Four. So for people in the United States that don't have any idea who they are or why this is a big deal, tell me about the Coutts Four and what's the latest that's happening there.
Well, the Coutts blockade was the same time as the Freedom Convoy, which I'm sure lots of your listeners know about, which was out in Ottawa, right? So you got, as soon as the protest starts out in Ottawa and it's rolling along, there's certain people that can make it to Ottawa, so now you start getting slow rolls or, these convoys essentially going into all the major cities in Alberta specifically, but it's Saskatchewan, it's Manitoba, and one of them set up a blockade at the Coutts border crossing. So you're looking, for your American listeners, essentially southern Alberta and what would be northern Montana. There's a border crossing there, and so it became known as the Coutts blockade. And what happens in Ottawa is eventually they bring out the Emergencies Act, but probably what doesn't get talked about enough is why they felt like, oh, the Emergencies Act is needed, because if people recall, Ottawa was ridiculously peaceful. They were trying to push people into this box, and they just kept smiling and bouncy houses and just all these fun things, hockey games and on it went. But what happens is 4 guys specifically get charged in Coutts for having weapons at the border crossing, and for this they justify everything. They charge them with conspiracy to commit murder, specifically against RCMP officers. And then, now it's been, 900 plus days they've been stuck in remand. And remand is where you go before they give you bail or before you have trial. And from all accounts that I've heard, Vance, it's not a great place for people to go. And so they get stuck there. We're talking at times solitary confinement. We're talking, where people come in and out all the time except for 4 guys. Fast forward the clock, 2 of them plead out, but not to conspiracy to commit murder. They pleaded out to weapons charges and a couple things in that, and which sounds like really dangerous and nefarious and everything else. And that brings us up to present moment, where this week, 2 of them were found guilty of possession of a firearm. One of them possession of explosives, and both not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. And so that sounds like you're sitting there and you're going, well, this doesn't sound great. Except, the more I dug into it, the explosives, for all your farm listeners, were 200 kilometers away from the protest. They were a family hand-me-down from the guy's dad, Anthony Olenick's dad, who they'd had a business where they used a bit of explosives, with drill bits and stuff for mining. And so he didn't even realize they were there. When the cops searched the place, it comes out that he had explosives. This gets tacked on his charges. Don't ask me.
Wait. Let me see if I got this right. So
Yes.
These guys are at a protest. Correct. They get arrested. They have weapons on them. And so the Royal Mounted Canadian Police take them into custody and then go search their house 200 kilometers away.
Correct.
And because there was an old explosive there,
correct,
they got charged with that as though they were carrying it around at the protest?
As if there was intent.
This is insane.
Yes. So
Okay. So how is the public reacting to this?
Well, I mean, the people that have been following along with it are completely outraged. Like, I mean, it's insane. But this is why I did so many roundtables around it, because when I tell it to you like that, part of your audience can be like, well, they were heavily armed. That doesn't sound great. Now, for your audience, knowing that there's a lot of farmers out there, one of the guys had a 22 and a shotgun, okay? And it sounds like they had been smart enough to, like, not carry it around with them. They'd put it off in a locked storage container away from the protest. And, I think what I caught is you got a bunch of men who probably got caught saying a few things like, we're going to go to war with the police and things like of that nature, that undercover cops, by all accounts, beautiful undercover cops, and I do mean that, very attractive women, kind of like got into this realm of where they use their words to then be able to go searching a little deeper and deeper and deeper. So they find weapons, which on all accounts was stupid, right? Like, I mean, bringing guns to a protest, not a good idea. But I always remind people, go back to that time where a country wasn't allowing us to leave, wasn't allowing a lot of us to get on federal transportation. So that means flights, trains, public or buses, on and on. We weren't allowed to go into restaurants. We had our largest city. I think Toronto's the largest. Forgive me if I'm off on that to all your Canadian listeners. I think it is. Basically say, the unvaccinated were, like killing people and killing grandma and all these crazy things. We're filling up the hospitals being talked about. You could just feel it. So in one breath, you go, why would they do that? And on the other breath, you go, because of the tensions that were going on at that time in Canada. It was an insane time. So they get caught with guns. Never used it. They get arrested peacefully. Everybody says they get arrested peacefully. On and on this goes. They don't have this long track record of having it out with the cops, right? And so you go, in theory, they should just get on bail, except this is political. And you fast forward to Monday. They both get convicted of 6.5 years. They get a little bit of time served because they were in 900-plus days. And yes, Anthony Olenek did not have explosives on them. They were, by all accounts, corroded, old, and everything. And that was laid on him as well. It doesn't make sense to me. And if I understood it correct, for whatever reason, that didn't get entered into the court. So it's like it's known outside of the court, but not in the court. Does that make sense to you? Like, I'm trying to regurgitate.
You mean that was never
the
fact that he wasn't carrying it around with him was not something that was entered into evidence? It was just like, oh, and by the way, he also had explosives?
Correct. Now, I'm being very simplistic of this, but on all the roundtables I did, as soon as I heard them, that's insane. Why would the cops do that? And then somebody said, well, listen, this is what they knew in the court. They didn't know all the stuff about it being corroded and being up on a high shelf, and that his dad had passed away, and it was some of his dad's stuff, and it was just stored in an old barn or shop or whatever. But I'm like, the more farmers I talk to about this, they're all going, oh man, think about this. If they come out to the farm, they can find whatever they want and all of a sudden say, I got explosives, and then it becomes tacked on the charge. This is how insane it is. And I'm trying not to be too flamboyant, except it just happened. And to tack that on, I had the Premier of Alberta on yesterday. And, I think one of my listeners said it best, like if she wants a second career after politics, she could become a tap instructor, because she kind of tiptoed and tapped around all the questions, including the Coutts Four. Now, in fairness, it's difficult for a premier to walk on and say, this is a travesty of justice. But to a lot of people here in Alberta, where we're supposed to be, the last bastion of freedom in Canada, for this to play out right in front of us, for us to be talking about it so much, it's just it's pretty tough pill to swallow, I guess. And that is knowing.
Yeah, to me, when you're saying like, I don't get it, I don't understand, like, the answer seems obvious. It is that the government wants to make sure that people are afraid to protest, that they are afraid that if they have even a 22 in their vehicle, that like their whole life could be ripped out of their hands. And so, this is a chilling effect. There are probably a lot of people whose spouses would stand in front of a door saying, look, you may want to go protest this, but I can't have you be gone for the next 3 years. serving time in a prison, so you're not going to go protest. And then that just cascades on and on. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that's what they're trying to do. Yeah.
And when an outsider, right, talks about it, I'm like, yeah, you're bang on, right? Like, so that's the big news on the Coutts Four. And then to top it off, they're appealing, the government, the Crown, is appealing the conspiracy to commit murder charges. So it's almost like, to add a little salt to the wound, they're also going to appeal that they're not guilty of a conspiracy to commit murder. It just seems like they're going to drag this out as long as they humanly possibly can. And sitting here in this chair and interviewing people around it, my goal was to just learn more about it, because when I first saw the picture, and for your listeners, when it first came out, there was this huge headline, and it showed this gun cache of just a crazy amount of weapons. And I was, the human instinct is, whoa, I'm not for killing cops. Whoa, this has gone way too far. And everybody backed up. And it got the effect that I believe they wanted to have. Because the longer you start to listen and talk to people, yeah, did they do some things that maybe you could go, okay, that wasn't a smart choice? Certainly. But nothing happened. Beyond nothing happened. And we got things going on in this country right now where things are happening and they're having a slap on the wrist. So it's, you listen to the mashup, and, the mashup can be the funniest or the most depressing thing on my week every week, because of just the state of affairs in Canada. And I mean, we hardly enter into the United States. It's not like you guys get a free pass, but staring at some of this, it's pretty wild up here.
So you said something kind of wild that I want to check back in.
Sure.
So in the U.S., when you go to trial, if you get found not guilty of something, the government can't come back and be like, oh, wait, we want another shot at this. It's called double jeopardy. You don't have the double jeopardy in Canada?
Well, I always thought, and I guess this is where I'll show it, I certainly don't know all. I always thought double jeopardy is you couldn't serve time for the same crime twice. But that's not the case.
I mean, I could be wrong about the words I'm using here, but in the U.S. system, if you are declared not guilty, you never have to go to trial for that again. You can't be brought up again on trial on charges. But because the government doesn't get a chance to appeal when a jury comes back and says they're not guilty. But maybe that begs the question: was there a jury there who said yes, these guys are guilty?
Well, so this is what got everybody real fired up this morning. Okay, so the Danielle Smith, and now by the time this airs, Vance, I realize I'm dating myself here, but so by the time this comes out, Danielle Smith had been on the podcast, and I'm just going to see if I can pull up, because everybody was in a tizzy because she said a jury of their peers found them guilty, and so that's what you're asking about, and then the comments after that went absolutely berserk, because a whole bunch of them said it was the judge. And so I'm just going to... This is where my thought was. It was a jury of their peers, found them not guilty, blah, 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 found them guilty of certain things, and then the judge came out and gave verdict on how much time they were going to get. That was my understanding. But when I started listening or watching the Twitter thread this morning, and I, of course, if I should have had it pulled up, but people were losing their mind about that. So I think there was a jury there. I'm positive there was a jury there. I'm more than positive that that's how they got found guilty. But after that, I'm I think it's the judge, Lebrenz, who came out and said, this is how much time they're going to get. I think that's how it went. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and in our system, it just depends on what kind of case it is, whether the jury gets to hand down in a civil case, a jury gets to award damages. In a criminal case, I think most of the time the jury doesn't decide how long do you go away. Their job is to say, did you do it or not? And then the judge looks at it and says, well, the jury found you guilty, so I'm going to give you this punishment for it. But regardless, the Danielle Smith conversation is deeply interesting. So people don't realize that you only have a few premiers. That's essentially the governor and of Alberta, which is a massive province in Canada. You get her on the show. You had been accused in the past of going a little too light on her. I've heard twos give you jabs. I've heard other people say.
Yeah.
hey, you're not going hard enough. You're saying, look, I got her on. If I go too hard, she'll never come back on. What am I supposed to do here? How did you do this time? You said she tap danced around some questions. Did you go hard in the paint?
Well, I don't know.
I wish I'd have listened to it. I just didn't know it was out this morning. Otherwise,
no. Well,
now.
let's put it to you this way, Vance. Who's your I don't know about you. I'll just answer my own question. The hardest critic of Shaun Newman is Shaun Newman. So when I come out of any podcast, I sit and when something really bothers me, and that's usually when I have the Premier on, because you just know thousands of people are going to watch it, and some of them want blood, some of them think it just doesn't matter. You cannot appease all the people. And so I would say the thing I've been saying about my interviews with Danielle Smith since she became Premier is the first one was like getting in a boxing ring, but having the big foam helmet on and the mouth guard in. I got my big gloves and we're all kind of laughing and you're kind of, oh, this is fine, right? And then I got tore up because I'm like, aren't you going to ask her? And I'm like, oh, I was happy for her, I voted, interviewed her all through COVID, and I'm, I try not to show bias, but back then I was really pulling for her. She was the one who got my vote. I never said that on air. But
and she has a ton of skills to be on air because that's what she was before she became Premier. She was a conservative talk show host and
correct.
Spent hours and hours and hours doing this.
Yes. And so the next time around, I would say, you understand you're getting in the ring. Okay, we're not putting the protective gear on, but you're fighting a person who's made their career of doing this, right? And before she was a radio host, she was the official opposition of our government in Alberta, right? This isn't just somebody who willy-nilly got into politics. And so this time around, I knew exactly what it was going to be, but now you're starting to see her be able to be like, okay, you want to step in the ring? That's fine. We're going to dance around some of your questions. I'm going to pick apart. I brought up Donald Trump talking with Elon Musk about, looking at efficiency in government because he reduced 80% of Twitter. And I stupidly said 80% of Twitter. And so she's like, 80%? Well, 80%. And she went off on 80%. I'm just like, you realize that's not what I'm saying. But I get what you're doing. And, there's a time crunch. So I don't get Danielle Smith for 2.5 hours. That'd be a lot of fun. It'd be a lot of fun to just be like, okay, let's talk about Coutts. Why are you, but then the way it works up here is the official opposition, which is the NDP, are going to lambaste her. So they give you this time constraint. At least this is my experience. And in that time constraint, a politician is going to talk. So you better pick your questions very well. And then you got to get real comfortable real fast with interrupting her when she ain't answering the question. But then she's going to push back on that. Oh, why are you interrupting me? Don't talk over me. And I would say, how did I do? Better than the two before, but I got a lot to learn. I'm still learning, and I look forward to hopefully sitting across from that lady for years to come where I can go back and forth with her. Now, we have an official, she has a leadership review coming this year, and so that's part of what the conversation was on because literally there's some undercurrent here of people that were staunch Danielle supporters that are questioning her leadership right now. And the Coutts thing is just one of multitude of things from, I would say, more of the freedom-minded group, but I'm not saying that's the entirety of it. And so, I think...
I mean, to hear Twos talk about it, he's prepared to vote for the NDP because of how disappointed he was. And I imagine there are a lot of people, when you have unmet expectations, you're going to have conflict. And people really thought, hey, we're putting somebody into office that's going to be able to make the sort of changes that allow Alberta to be sovereign, have some energy freedom, have some ability to not be bottled down.
A simple one was just a tax cut. It was just she ran on giving people a tax cut. Hasn't happened. When simple little stupid things, but they all matter. As we had a gas tax of 13 cents and it was at zero, provincial fuel tax. And, the way a politician will talk, well, it goes to roads and it goes to infrastructure and on and on. When she got in, it was zero. They had put it to zero to help people cope with what was going on. And then it went up to 9, and then on April 1st, when the federal government was introducing all their taxes, which she's mad about, they put it all the way back up to 13. And you're like, read the room. Just read the room. And I don't know if it's her or if it's her entire team, But, it's politics, and you see people all the time get involved in it, and you're like, they're staring at a different world than what this simple podcast host stares at, I guess. I'm just one voice, right, out of 5 million in Alberta.
So, you mentioned taxes, people having a lot of pressure on them, inflation. I know in the U.S. inflation is bad. The government wants to tout like, hey, look, it's down, to 2.5%, or it's down to, but it's still, that's 2.5% of the new normal, right? It's that even if you bring that number down, you're still accelerating the amount that you're decreasing the value of the dollar. What's going on with inflation in Canada right now?
Yeah, well, they're doing the same thing. They're saying, "Oh, it's going down." But I saw a great post, and because somebody said, "Could you just explain it to me in like layman's terms? I don't get what we're down to 2.5%. Inflation's going down. Meanwhile, everybody's struggling to pay their grocery bill and their heating bill and rent and on and on and on." And somebody said, "Oh, imagine you're 180 pounds and then you gain 20." And then the next year you only gain 10, and the next year you only gain 5, and the next year you only gain 2.5. And you go, I only gained 2.5 pounds this year. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. And that's Canada right now. And we're not doing, like, go to the grocery store, anyone will tell you the same cart load is, like, you're getting less and less in a cart for the same amount of money, right? Money isn't doing what it was. I don't need to tell you that, other than to just say Canada is very similar to the States. We probably have a few oddities that are a little different than you guys, but have been for quite some time. And the one I'm thinking of specifically is probably fuel. Like gas is more expensive here. It just is.
Well, and you buy it by the liter, and that's weird. Nobody really knows how much is in a liter.
Differentiate ourselves from the old Americans for sure.
Well, I mean, when I think of the struggles that Canada's gone on, one of the things I've learned, you and I being friends for all these years, traveling up there, visiting you, it seems like everything that you guys go through 2 years later, we have going on here. And it really seems like people are, I think people that used to be like, government's not that big of a deal. Trudeau, I could go either way. When I'm talking to people that I know in Canada that are relatively liberal, most of the people I know are either in farming or fishing. So there's going to be conservative people. But there are a lot of people that would never have imagined would say a coarse word about Trudeau, is basically like, turn the whole thing over. We want nothing to do with this. So, but I have a very skewed perspective on this. Does it ultimately mete out that you think Trudeau is going to be exited? Are you going to have a conservative government in Canada after all this inflation and people having trouble buying houses and all this stuff?
Well, if you go by polls, which I hate polls, but let's just, let's see what the polls say. Yes, we're going to have conservatives in.
I don't believe in any polls. I think they're a total. I think it's like throwing confetti up in the air and being like, count how much is here. I don't think it means anything. At least in the United States. I don't know.
I hate to throw this, when do people change, Vance?
When things are awful, when they cannot stand it anymore. Yeah.
Right. So things are really, 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 really bad. And yet times are just good enough that it doesn't have enough people mad, right? Like during COVID, there was a point where you couldn't even walk across the street without being yelled at if your mask wasn't up to your nose, right? Like it just got to insanity points. Can't leave the country, can't do this. It's affecting everybody. And when everybody's affected like that, all of a sudden the convoy happens and the government says they can't do anything fast. And let me tell you, boom, 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 things happen quick. Jason Kenney, we were just talking about this 2 days ago. I was saying, the Freedom Convoy happens, and it's like within 2 weeks, things start coming off. And the person looks at me, 2 weeks? No. He comes out and he says, by a week, we'll have the Vax pass. So this pass, that allows you to get into places. It'll be off by, a week from now. Then it was 4 days. Then it was the next night. Like, things happen fast because everyone was pissed. And it doesn't matter how many little Karens are running around saying, well, boys can be girls. Sorry to all your listeners if I'm offending anyone. I don't think I will be. But, there's just stupidity in the world. And Karens have this loud voice somehow, and they're getting funded by all these people. And somehow the rest of us just like, well, I guess, whatever. Let bygones be bygones. So why I'm saying all this is during COVID, You could have overthrown the apple cart, and they knew it. And so that's why, the EA pisses so many people off, and that leads back to Coutts, okay? So where we sit right now is, it looks to me, if I was the guy pulling the strings, and I don't want to get too tinfoily hatty, but I would put Pierre Poilievre in. And the reason why is people will go back to sleep. Like, right away. Like, Pierre's in, Conservatives in, things are going back to the good. And, in fairness, he's going to do some things. He's probably going to axe the tax, the carbon tax that is. He's probably going to defund the CBC, I would guess. And then he's going to try and do some other things that conservative-minded people probably will endorse and be like, rah, we're going the right way. But you bring it back to what Danielle Smith is doing, and why part of her base is pissed is because she ran on a bunch of things, and even if she's doing a lot right, it feels like it's taken way too much time. She's dragging her feet, and people they've already seen how quickly governments can move. And they're playing this game where it takes time, and we need to have another group and another panel take a look at this. People are getting fed up. And on top of it, times are tough. Inflation is brutal. Things are strange. It's just, and the judicial system seems like it's wound up against us, which has probably been for a long time. That is rant off. Vance, have your say.
Well, I was thinking that when I was younger, I remember watching this documentary, and it was of people in East Germany. And there was a kid there talking about how things weren't that bad. And the parents were like, well, you don't understand. Before the wall was put up, we had way better, access to groceries. We had way better, the electricity. We just had better access to the news, whatever things they were saying they had better access to. And the kid was like looking at them bewildered. And I think that that's something that's kind of going on right now in our culture, is that as you lose freedoms, as you lose, the benefit of technology, the low prices, the new normal comes in, and people forget what it used to be like. I mean, how much do people remember what COVID was like? Just a few years ago, people have already forgotten it. You get this new normal, and that level of complacency for what will it mean to upset the apple cart, where are we trying to get back to, becomes very distorted in people's minds, I think.
Yes. Listen, I agree with you on what you just said. People have a very short memory. And sitting in where I sit, I just talk about things, over and over and over again. I see different sides. I follow up on certain stories. And, people right now, just think of our age group, right? Young kids. Some days it's just like you roll into bed at 8:30 at night, you hammer your pillow, and you're out, and you get up and you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, and you go back to it. And that's rinse and repeat. And pretty soon, like a month's gone by, and you're like, or a week or whatever time frame you want. And you're like, where the heck did the days go? And you don't have enough time to worry about some of the things that are going on a political stage, let alone, who the Oilers are playing next. And apologies to Vance, because I know he isn't that big of a hockey fan.
Oh, man. I think that you're totally right about the amount of stuff when you're at the prime age of I should be paying attention to politics because this is going to impact my children's future, is when you have the least amount of time to do it. And this is like,
well, I've been wrestling with this, Vance, okay? Our age group right now, okay? Now, you can take that anywhere you want, but I would say 35 to, let's say, 45. You are like, very energetic. You got ideas. You want to implement. You want to be a part of your community. You want to do all these things. But then, being a young father, I'm trying to balance out, but I don't want to be gone every night. I want to be around my kids. Every old timer tells me when you get to their age, they wish they would have spent more times with their kids, and that's what they miss. They don't cherish. There'll be billionaires out there that go, you want your kids to want to hang around with you when they get older. Well, you don't get that by just disappearing out of their life, and not to mention what that does to a marriage and everything else. So I wrestle with this all the time, right? Because right now, with the limited success I've had with the podcast, you get asked to do like a ton of stuff, which you want to do. But then I'm gone that weekend, and then I'm gone the weekend after, and then I'm gone there. And you start to realize, well, then I can't coach my kids' hockey team. And I can tell you right now, the best decompressant, like to relax, the stress reliever is to go around with a bunch of 5 and 6 year olds on the ice and watch them scream and yell and cry and everything in between. And so to lose that out of your life is like, and yet, so to lose that out of your life might be the most detrimental thing in the world. But on the flip side, while the world's burning right in front of your eyes and you are getting asked to go help things, I don't know how to balance that. Well, I know how to balance it. I just, at the same time, I don't know. How do you do it?
Well, I would say that doing these legacy interviews, I know you've started doing some legacy interviews. You did them in the past. I have had this great benefit of hearing people talk about their lives. And my perspective is a little bit different than yours. I've heard a lot of dads in particular, but moms too, say years later, hey, I didn't want to be gone, but I needed to. The family needed that money, and I don't regret it. And I hope my kids understand that sacrifice. And that's been something that's been really good for me to hear, because I have this incredible tension between, if I want my business to be successful, then I need to be working on it. But if I'm working on it, I am not with my children. My wife is also running a business. And so there's that constant tension. Every minute I'm spending with my children, I'm not spending on my business. Every minute I'm spending on my business, again, away from your children. But I don't want to just feel guilt for wherever I'm at. You know, I don't want to be with my kids and feeling guilty that I'm taking away from their future. And I don't want to feel the guilt of I'm working late and being like, I didn't get a chance to read them, and they're not going to want to read biscuit books for very long, but they want to read about that little puppy. And if you give that up, you're not going to be able to go back and get it.
Yeah, it's once again though, it's the balance of that, right? I think the guilt thing is important. No matter what you're doing, don't feel guilty about it, right? Like, but at the same time, make sure you're not sitting up till 12 every night playing video games. You know, like there's sacrifices you have to make even in that train of thought, right? Like, if I'm going to push, let's go push. But when I'm with my family, let's be with my family. And let's not have guilt over where I'm at.
I have this great marketing mentor of mine named Steve Bodden. I hope he listens to this, but he one time said to me, you know, Vance, if you want to be successful in this world, you want to run a business that works, sometimes you got to kill your puppies. And that was like, what are you talking about? But just like you were saying, you get offered these things to go give a speech, to take on, different opportunities with legacy interviews or different podcasts. And you're like, I don't want to give that up. That's such a precious thing. Not very many people get this. What a big opportunity. And he was like, you can't do it all. You have to kill some puppies along the way. And that's, I think there's probably a metaphor similar to that with, how you balance everything, raising your kids and whatnot.
I was out, that's a real tough analogy, right? Go kill some puppies. Woo!
I hope he's the one that told me that. Otherwise he's going to be sitting there being like, I never said that, but I'm pretty sure it's Steve.
I just came from, like of all the things, you probably have things on your side you've done. You're like, I never thought I'd be doing that. This will be the second funeral so today, while I was late getting in here, not that your audience knows or cares, but I was emceeing a funeral, which was about as uncomfortable a stage you can be on, right? You have to be somber, kind of, and, you're trying to respect a family's loved one that's passed on and on and on. For some reason, it took me back to the first conversation me and you ever had, where you're like, what do you want when you're done? I'm like, I don't know. People show up, community to show up, and like, I probably sound like a real hillbilly back then, but I was watching this, it was in Hillmond, where I'm originally from, this small little farming community, and, it was beautiful. It was like, all the families came out and shared some laughs, some smiles. It was a sad day. They talked about that being a sad day. And yet, there they all were. They all came out, supported the family. You got to see people you hadn't seen in forever. The food you will find no better food than a small town Saskatchewan funeral. I mean, some Saskatchewan person is going to argue with me on whether you can get it at the curling club or what have you. And, like, that's what I think that's what people need out of life, is that type of community. And yet I go, I don't know how the heck you find it in today's world, because we're running at such a fast pace, and there's such a lack of trust, for rightfully so at times, right? Because, some horrific things have happened in different places over the course of time. But I don't know how you get back to that. I was kind of watching it, and there's a generation of my parents, so, people probably in their late 50s to probably early 70s. You go, what do we got? 20 years of this left? And then is this going to slowly dissipate, or is there going to be a new way to find community in this future we're running into, where you can have all these families come in at a funeral and really surround one? I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know how it goes in St. Louis. I just see with my eyes from a small town farming community doing. I've seen it over and over again. Today, just really knowing I was coming on here, I was paying attention to it, going like, this is something, and I think we're losing this.
Well, I know where I grew up, small town, central Illinois, a funeral was a big part of the community activity. It's actually like sometimes you would have some churn there where you'd get to see people you hadn't seen in 6 months or a year or a couple of years. And now that I'm in St. Louis, I think I've only been to one funeral. I've been here for 10 years, right? And that just goes to show how disconnected from the community I am. This made me think of an experience I had when I was growing up. I one time was dating a girl and her brother died, and it was really unexpected. And so, I go to the funeral and she's so upset, and she and her parents asked me to sit next to her. I really hadn't been dating her very long, and she's sitting there crying, and I don't really know what to say. So I lean over to her, the rest of the church is quiet. And I said, I think if your brother were looking down right now, watching this, the thing he'd want to know is, who the hell is that guy sitting next to my sister? And I thought it'll perk her up, but instead it made her burst out laughing. And I don't think I've ever been more embarrassed in my life. But that story has no place in what we were talking about, other than I've never had a chance to tell that story.
So it works.
Because you can't walk out of there and be like, did you guys all hear that joke? That was awesome.
Well, you brought a smile to her face, obviously, right?
Oh, man, that was embarrassing, right? Because then you're sitting next to the girl that's no longer crying. She's laughing, and you're clearly the one that did it. And everybody is like, no, for real, who is that guy that's sitting there? Moving on, what do you guys think of... hey, I wanted to throw something out there. So you have a co-host on your mashup.
Anyways, going back to what we were talking about.
You mentioned the mashup, and for my listeners that don't know, you have your Shaun Newman podcast, and then once a week you put out the mashup. It used to be that you did it on Monday nights, and so Tuesday mornings when I'd be working out, I'd listen to it. Now you guys do it on Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern, or 10 a.m. Mountain.
10 a.m. Mountain Standard, so 11 Central.
You have a co-host on there. He's been a guest on my podcast, Twos, and I love talking with Twos. I didn't like him when you first had him on the podcast. I don't know if Twos knows this. Probably, as long as I'm just doing confessions here, I'm just going to say I remember being like, "What are you doing with this guy? This is like, he's a bozo." But then I came to find out no, actually this guy is incredibly intelligent, and he uses his humor and his dirty jokes to throw people off the scent. But I listened to this mashup for I don't know, 2 years. And one time it dawned on me, is actually the only podcast that I listen to regularly. And I loved the cadence that you guys were talking about the news, and you were talking about what's going on. And I was learning all about what's going on in Canada. And that's what prompted me to start the Ag Tribes Report. So I started this podcast where each week I bring on a different co-host to talk about what their view of what's going on in agriculture, because a lot of people think of ag as one big thing, but the reality is dairy farmers are different than grain farmers, are different than cattle ranchers, are different than almond farmers. And so now I've started using the fact that I've met all of these people throughout the United States and Canada to interact with all these guests. But part of me is jealous that I don't have a Twos where you have this rapport and all these jokes and all of this interaction,
all this
that you
inner
guys
hatred.
have.
And I told him today that I was nervous. I don't know, what the hell did I say? I might as well say it on air, confessions here with Vance. I said something to him along the lines of, I was nervous of my interview with Danielle Smith because I thought Twos was going to tear me apart on Friday. And he goes, "You were nervous about my thoughts?" And I'm like, fuck, Twos, no, stop it. And he's like, you're never going to let that down. And we'll see what comes on the next couple mashups where he takes that. Matt, I don't know, man. I think it's out there. I think everybody's can find a partner in crime, if you would. Me and Twos do a show once a week, and when I first heard him 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, maybe, He talked differently than most of the people I was normally wanting to associate with. And a good show that has back and forth. And now, in fairness, my hope is over time we'll have a producer. So I can actually have a true back and forth. Because right now, as your guests probably get, maybe they don't, right? To have a show with bells and whistles and dings and dongs, and my brain is half the time listening to whatever he's saying. Half the time it's just focused on making sure we move on to the next thing. Because if Twos was left to his own devices, we'd have a 4-hour mashup every Friday.
Oh, I know. I did the mashup with him,
Right.
and I kept chatting him like, how much longer are we going here? And he's like, we can just keep going. And I about wet my pants because I was like, I need to go to the bathroom so bad. And I think we did it like 2.5 hours or something like that.
Well, so that's a fun month. You know, this was the first year I ever slowed the podcast down in 5 years. So in 5 years, minus right after the convoy, I have done everything so methodically. Whether it was one podcast a week, whether it was 2, whether it was 3, whether it got up to 5. And then for once on family holidays, I went, okay, July, I'm going to slow it down. We're going to have some guest hosts come in on the mashup, which was a ton of fun. The audience loved, because now when you talk about cadence, me and Twos have our cadence. We have our things that piss us off about each other, and we go back and forth, kind of like an old married bickering couple is kind of what I've been told. But for the most part, we have our little cadence. But as soon as you stick in a guest host, the cadence gets thrown way out of whack, because Twos is trying to figure out, well, I got Vance Crow on. And you can hear him trying to but you can't do the same cadence because you're not me, nor is Drew Weatherhead, nor is Chuck Prodnick, right? And so this little thing starts happening, and it's almost like enjoyable. I listened to all of them. I was like, this is fascinating, right? I want to be back in the seat, but at the same time, to be a part away from your show, right? To release things on the Shaun Newman podcast that don't have me in it is like, I have no idea where this is going, and I don't know how long. I see 2.5 hours. I'm like, what is Dude's doing? He knows we shoot for an hour and 15 minutes. Whether we hit that, folks, is beyond. I mean, we're pretty awful at that.
Well, so that's the side that I get is the guest co-host. And one of the things that I've tried to set up with the Ag Tribes Report is we do headlines, and then I ask them, like, what's the price of land where you're at? We convert it into Bitcoin. And then I start asking them, who's your worthy adversary? So who is somebody that's on social media that you respect but you totally disagree with? And what is your Peter Thiel paradox? And what I love about this is you take somebody that is normally very comfortable, really well respected in their tribe, and we're doing headlines, bang, 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 bang. Then we go to like, now tell me about something nobody agrees with you on, but you got to say it in a way that now you can talk me into agreeing with me on it. And then you've got to tell me about somebody that you don't like, but that you respect. So it makes people nervous. And I love it, right? It's like this high pressure situation, and you start to see the colors of people peek out that you maybe wouldn't normally see. And you see who's successful at creating that banter and who's just like colliding into the wall.
One of the things that I like seeing about you, Vance, right, is something that lights you up, right? Like I started doing on my side, I got a Substack, right? I'm not a great writer. I'm going to say that right off the bat. I'm not going to sit there, write an essay, and everyone's going to be like, wow, you should write a book. Nope, not me. But I really like walking back through the week, chopping it up a little bit into little clips, and putting out like a little week in review. I did it like 2 years ago, but it was so much freaking work that I'm like, I just can't justify it. Fast forward. And I'm like, I got this Substack, and people want me to release stuff, but I don't want to just fill up their inbox. Like, what's the point of that? And I'm not having fun. Like, it's eating at me. So I just stopped. July, I'm just like, fuck it. I'm not doing anything. And then I had the idea again. I'm like, I should do the week in review again. I haven't done that in a while. I started doing it. I started getting up at 5 a.m. and chopping up these little things. And I'm no magician when it comes to videos, but I think they're decent. And I'm having lots of fun again. I'm having so much fun that I'm getting up at 5 a.m. on Sundays to do this. And when you talk about your ag report, I go, you're having fun. That's the main thing. That's what me and Twos said about the mashup. We're at, 124 this week? So what is that? Over 2 years ago, we said we're going to do 5. And if we weren't having fun, then we're going to stop. I said, I don't give a shit if we get 10,000 views or we get 0 views. If we're not having fun, there's no point in doing this because, like, every week will become monotonous where I don't want to see and talk to you and I don't care. Not to mention the mashup is like 3 hours at least of reading, of headlines at least every week. You sit down and you just got to crush newspaper after newspaper after newspaper. Sometimes I get so frustrated by the CBC, I just want to stop. But I enjoy it so much. And when you talk about the egg report, I'm like, I'm glad you're having fun because I think that's the main thing. And once you start having fun with it, your audience is going to catch on to that, and then they come along for the ride because it's fun. Like, this is a ton of fun, but that's a different cadence. It's a different feel than just a one-on-one.
Yeah, the Ag Tribes report, like, interacting with all these people that are really like highly esteemed in their field. So I had a woman named Tyne Morgan on. So she runs, one of the most prestigious weekly news shows. And in a couple of weeks, I just got an agreement from a guy, this won't mean anything to you, but a guy named Bill Bullard, who runs an organization called RCAF, is going to come on. So RCAF is the rebel cattlemen. These are the guys that are saying, oh, your national checkoff, like F off, we hate you. What you guys are doing is all wrong. You're in bed with the lobbyists. And as soon as the NCBA picks up the phone and says, Vance, we don't like that you did that, I'm going to be like, all right, well, send your president on. Let's have him on. And I'm going to just keep trying to bring as many different tribes as I can from all different directions, because right now there isn't a place you can go. You can either go to the rebel side or you can go to the mainstream side, but there's nobody mixing all these things up.
Mixing and matching. Yeah.
There is nothing more fun for me in the whole world than finding people that don't agree and being like, let's just push you closer together. And I want to get to the point where, like what you were doing, I want to get to the point where I'm making debates happen, where I'm moderating a debate and we make this like really a place where people can have different ideas, but we talk it out because, I think we can all see what happens when we stop talking and we just say the other side is evil.
Yeah. We get to exactly where we are, on the brink of World War III, Civil War. Nobody's willing, just go to the simplest, come into your communities. Nobody's willing to talk to each other anymore. And what did I say back at the funeral? I'm like, I look around, I'm like, man, this is what you want. You want people sitting down and happy to see one another. And what are you doing? And, oh, yeah, that's great. Not worried about some of the insanity that certainly government is pushing right now. So bringing people together, especially if they disagree, is probably of utmost importance at this point. It's a hard thing to do, though. It's a hard
Your
thing
tweet
to do.
right before we got on was about, the adults need to step in. Otherwise, we're going to hit to either nuclear war or World War III. And it was basically a tweet with Putin in it. I didn't even have to look at it. I just had to say, like, look no further than the conversation in the Trump-Kamala Harris debate. Like, these are not people having sophisticated thoughts about foreign policy. These people are bludgeoning each other with bats. Do you think the West may stumble into a nuclear war?
Well, I'm going to say this first, okay? I get no vote. Sadly, this Canadian doesn't get to vote in your election. So before I piss anybody off on who and what I think, I just want to make that very clear, right? Like, I don't get to vote. So it's like a Canadian watching what's going on. I don't like the Democrats because they have been in government, acting government now for 4 years. And we are so freaking close. It is insane to me. And I look at that and I go, if they stay in, we're going to war. Like, to me, it's just like, heck, we might already be at war. We probably are at war. And the video I was showing with Putin is, the West has given Ukraine the ability to send long-range missiles into Russia, right? It's like, and what Putin's saying is, if this is true, then it's NATO countries, EU countries, giving them things, which means they're attacking us, which actually means we're at war with NATO, which means we're, and you're like, listen, you can hate or love Putin. I give two craps. Look at what our countries are doing and look at where we're heading. We're heading so freaking close. It is mind-blowing. And so I go, if the Democrats get in, for sure we're going to war. It scares the shit out of me. I'm of age where I'd probably, be, if they ever drafted, if it ever got to that, if it wasn't a nuclear war where everything just blows up and we all carry on to the abyss, like if it were to actually have where people go off and it was something that resembles World War II, which I don't think it will be, but you get the point. I'm still of age. And then I got young kids and they're boys. And where are they going to grow up into, right? I'm just not for it. On the flip side, you got the Republicans. And, Trump, the bombastic ass he is, I do believe he will call Putin the first day he's in office. And if you listen to what Putin's saying, is like Biden hasn't called him in 2 years. There's been no communication. What are we talking about with communications? Like, listen,
who could he even talk to? Who would be the president that he would call that would be a coherent... who could he call?
It isn't Biden. And, Kamala Harris resembles Justin Trudeau so much to me. It's just... We live in really fucked up times, pardon the F-bomb. And I don't know. World War III feels like it's already here. And I don't know if you can put everything back in. But Putin specifically seems like he's dragging his feet for the next 50 days, maybe I'm wrong, to see what happens and shakes out in your guys' election.
To me, the thing that is driving us towards World War III, and my audience is, they've heard me say this type of stuff hundreds of times, you have too, is the fiat system. It is the endless printing of money and the war machine that was like, hey, what a great way for us to get rid of all our old munitions so that way the government can print more money and then buy more real munitions and advanced weaponry. And they're doing this because they're all making money off of that. They're taking cuts. And I never used to be a person that thought our politicians were literally corrupt, but now I think it is absolutely undeniable. You look at the way they get to do insider trading, the way that they own, they get to know what stocks are going to do well and if we're going to war. And the only way this ends is to get on a Bitcoin standard, because the war machine, the draw to it, just there is such an endless draw towards war, towards power, towards spending money that is somebody else's, that until there is an absolute control where there is no ability to print money, we are in the inevitable trap. Even if Trump gets in, then how long could he be president for? At most 4 years. That's it. So to me, we are on the path of nuclear war until we get off of the U.S. dollar.
So you're not worried in 50 some days who gets in then?
I think that you're right. I agree with your assessment that Donald Trump showed during his first election that he was absolutely going to shut down wars and figure out a way to do it so that the U.S. could save face and also, back out. And then when Biden got in there, you see what happened in Afghanistan and all of that insanity. But over the long term, no, because I think the fact that Biden is the president, but he is not the one actually running things, is all the evidence you need. Yeah. That position is ceremonial, and that it is far more ceremonial than people believe. Because at the end of the day, the only reason that president has power is if the military listens to him. And I think that our military has shown when Trump was in office before that they were going to openly say, we showed him reports that told him this thing, even though we wanted this thing to happen. And I think that it's very clear to me that it doesn't really matter who you elect because we are being run by the bureaucracy.
I think Trump buys you time, or at least in my mind, that's the way I look at it. Trump buys you time.
Why does he buy you time? Last time he got elected, they burned down cities, right? They were dropping off pallets of bricks and people were burning down cities. And, the whole conversation was about, should we, like all the fires that were going on outside the White House. All the insane protests. I think it is equal chaos in all directions.
Trump gets elected and they burn down your cities. Biden gets elected, they go trying to burn down the world. Like, you look at it, right?
I feel the temptation to be like, the group that we have, they're leading us towards this thing. Let's get the new one in. And first of all, I think that Trump, like whoever he was when he ran for office 8 years ago, I don't think he's that guy anymore. I watched part of the debate, and I found that it was so farcical. I was like, I could either be doing this or sleeping, and sleeping's more valuable. But what I noticed was he does not have the same pop, right? There were opportunities for him to make
or,
jokes
or,
that he.
Or it's not the pop. It's that he's done it for so long that everybody knows it's coming. You know, I watched him and Theo Vaughn, and I'm not a big giant Theo Vaughn guy, so not because I don't. It's just his style. I don't know what it is about his style that kind of just irks me on a level. But in saying that,
you guys are remarkably similar.
Me and Theo Vaughn.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In the fact that you both disarm people by how simple you come off. And that's actually like why people are.
Did Vance just call me simple, folks? I think he did.
Yeah,
no, you come off as simple.
You know exactly what I'm saying. You ask simple questions, and the people that ask the simplest questions are the best listeners, and that's what he does.
Man.
He asks great questions because they're simple. So you can hate on Theo Vaughn all you want, but you're just looking at a little mirror reflection. You're just not from the South.
All right. Well, when I'm doing cocaine and I'm on my front porch like an owl. You know, anyways, what I was saying about that interview was what Theo Vaughn did for Trump. I'm sure somebody else has done it, but I can't remember it. I listened to the Tucker Carlson one. It didn't come out there. And what Theo Vaughn did was he allowed Trump to show his human side, like his actual person. No, I don't drink. And he actually disarmed him, like you're saying, and you got to see, oh my God, Trump is actually when his guard's down, talks like a human being, and actually has a human side to him. I feel like what Kamala Harris is doing exceptionally well right now, hate it or love it, is she is selling this portrait of herself of how she's just one of you. She's just like this whole humble girl, and she rose up, and everybody's, we're all going to be better. The middle class is going to be better. Meanwhile, then Trump all has to say is, listen, look at the last 4 years. What you're selling doesn't match what the world is, so stop it. And I wonder with Trump's team if they should do a little more of what they did with Theo Vaughn, where it's like appeal to the voter base. You already got the MAGA fans. You already got I can't do the voice.
Do you think anybody doesn't already know who they're voting for?
I don't know.
Do you think there's anybody in the United States that's like, I don't know, I'm kind of leaning this way and I'm kind of leaning that way? I think the question is, will I go to vote or not? Is probably the biggest question.
So what would
will I take the time?
So what would you want to see out of any of the presidential candidates that would get Vance out of his chair and go, yeah, I think it's time to go vote?
I mean, the Ukraine war is probably the biggest thing to get me out of my chair. My brother, mocked me mercilessly, but I got iodine tablets to put in my house because I feel like it is a strong possibility that there'll be a nuclear weapon that'll go off somewhere that will blow fallout, and I want my children not to lose all their hair and their liver's ability to function. So as long as we don't get hit by a nuclear weapon, I'm going to try and do everything I can to survive. And I think that's a real possibility now. And that probably makes me seem like a crazy person.
It doesn't.
But
what are you talking about? Russia had boats at Cuba. I feel like a crazy person. No, you're crazy if you aren't paying attention to this, realizing how precipitously freaking close we are to this. And you got Sleepy Joe, and I am going to use their words, at the helm, and we've been discussing it. You got nobody at the helm. There's nobody to call. He's walking around giving handshakes to nobody. He's calling people by the wrong name. He's going the wrong way. It's awful. So you got Kamala Harris who walks in. I just don't get your guys' process. It's probably like the thing I've argued with Democrats specifically about. And Republicans, you can come at me too. It's fine.
You don't know any Democrats. What Democrat do you know? Oh.
I'm married into a family from Minnesota.
Okay,
believe me,
fair enough.
I'm surrounded by Democrats. And the thing that I don't understand, right, is why you want to win so bad that you'll put your finger on the scale and won't get the best candidate, right? So Biden gets in because everybody thinks he's good. I don't quite get that because he was the president and they probably sold some story. And then by the time they're around and he does the first debate, they just give it to Kamala. And I'm like, but that's not the way democracy works. Like, if your best leader is RFK Jr., and I know you're a big fan of him, or it's somebody else, Bernie Sanders, I don't care. I honestly don't care. Whoever it is, Gavin Newsom, I could care less. If that's who people vote for, that's who should be the leader of the Democrat Party. But what they did was a little sleight of hand. All of a sudden, Kamala Harris is your leader. And I'm like, okay, you talk about it being a figurehead position as a president. I'm like, what they just did proves it more so than Joe Biden being the guy, because they just circumvented how you should elect your leader. It happened right in front of you. And here's the thing. You're not alone. Canada's the same way. Pierre Poilievre is going to be the leader of probably Canada here in another year. But if you go back to when the Conservatives had their leadership race, there was 3 guys who made they had to hop through these hurdles to get on the national debate scene for becoming the leader of the Conservative Party. And they did some funny stuff there too. And nobody raised an eyebrow. It's like, well, the Conservatives know what's best. It's like, no, that's human beings playing. Like they're stacking the board so that they get the guy who's going to do the things they want because they care about winning so much. It is no longer about democracy. And honestly, I might be getting blackpilled about this a little bit more. I talk about it, Vance. Maybe this has been the way ever since the beginning. And this is just human nature. And humans are going to constantly screw ourselves over because they want the power. They want to be at the top. And so, like, rant off again. You got me fired up.
I mean, I probably was the most naive about politics and government that anybody could be. I mean, I went to Washington, D.C. and joined the World Bank thinking, like, finally, I'm going to be able to help save the world. And then you get to D.C. and you're like, holy shit, there is so much corruption here and it's way out in the open, and doesn't anybody see this? And then over time, you kind of fall down that path. And like, the challenge of democracy is that it is really only effective at the smallest possible level, where you know the other people that you're voting with, where like what your vote does is it elects somebody that you know, somebody that's going to have to see you. It probably only works in communities somewhere around the Dunbar number. And then beyond that, you're voting abstractly for the figment of an idea. And I think that could work for quite some time. But one of the lessons I'm pulling from legacy interviews is how much community involvement people had in the past. And a lot of that stemming from the fact that we didn't have cell phones, we couldn't do email, we couldn't imagine that the efficiency was allowing us to transcend. So people had to show up, and in showing up over and over, week in, week out, month over month, being the president or the treasurer or the secretary, you got to know those people. And then you were going to go serve in this elected office. And then when you came back, you had to have a job. You had to be a part of the community. So you were answerable to that. None of the politicians at the national level are going to answer to us. Nancy Pelosi has so much money from her, amazing ability to trade stocks. She's never going to answer to any of us. So I feel weird saying it, but I don't think I'm going to teach my children, like, democracy. You live in the greatest country on earth because look how much freedom we have. Like, I don't know that I believe it.
Yeah, this is where we get to, or where I'm getting to, is kind of what you're saying. And is that like what I'm starting to realize, right? I'm an eternal optimist. But where I'm getting to is like, this has been going on for thousands of years. Not 50 years. Don't kid yourself. You take any tinfoil hat conspiracy you want, you put it back to Club of Rome, Fabians, go further back, go further forward. I don't care. It's just today's version of what went on in days of Rome. And before that, like, people are corruptible and people are selfish. Hey, I got a selfish bone in me too. And I wrestle with that all the time, right? And like, this is a human problem we got going on. And then we put it in a package of democracy. And I've said this a lot over the course of probably a year, is monarchy here in Canada gave us our freedom and gave us the illusion of democracy. And I feel like I'm starting, or maybe I've been cluing into this for some time, and then you start to see the illusion or the game, right? I just, on Monday, I'll have Martin Armstrong out again. He was put away for 12 years, and he has a light way of talking about it. And he just says, like, once you understand the game and what the game is, you start to see for what the consequences are. You start to see of what a government is capable of what people are capable of attaining power, of trying to attain power. And then you have to either play by their rules or go and not play that game. But you're still going to live under what they build. because you're in a country that has a government and then all the things that stem from it. And, you just keep talking about this, and it just keeps presenting itself over and over again. And the more you realize it, the more you're watching the debate stage, you're like, is everybody else seeing this? Do people even care that this is what's going on? And I think part of what politicians and people in power realize is the bread and circus thing, right? If people are busy and for the most part happy, they're going to grumble, and then they're going to go about their day, and they're going to forget everything and just carry on. And the weird thing about sitting in these two chairs, Vance, is we stare at it all the freaking time.
The book that blackpilled me was a book called The Dictator's Handbook, and there was a YouTube video created by a guy named CGP Grey called The Rules for Rulers, and it's describing like when you get in charge, if you're like the president or the dictator, you're not actually in charge. What you do is you get to be the CEO. You get the money that comes in the door, and then you hand that money out to these different groups. And as long as you continue, you're buying both what they can bring you, military, roads, whatever, but then they are also like, they want to serve you because they want to keep you in power. But if you mismanagement, they throw it out. I listened to this and I was like, yeah, well, that's for people in Cuba or Venezuela or whatever. And then you start looking at it at the United States and you're like, whoa, actually, that's what's going on here. That's what they're promising, they're going to do for a leader. That's how that. So for me, that black pilling was a dark time for me because it took me from this naive, very hopeful person to being not hopeful until I found Bitcoin. And this may be why I so try and talk about it with as many people as I can, because it is for the first time in human history that you have a money that the government can't take over and start the idea of seigniorage, where they're the ones that get to choose what is money and how available it is. That gets taken away from them, and when it gets taken from them, then the power gets pulled out of that and back into the hands of the citizens. So I've been black-pilled and then probably orange-pilled that brought me back up to the surface.
I told you I bought my first not my first actual Bitcoin, but I bought Bitcoin. I don't know what that means.
Talk about it. How did that go?
Awful at the beginning. Like I just so I bought Bitcoin, and then my bank shut down my entire account. I was in the States, and they wouldn't give me access. And most Bitcoiners will be like, oh, they just chuckle like you just did. Oh yeah, welcome to the game. And I'm like,
welcome to the game.
I'm like, they literally shut down my bank account, my main bank account. And so then I called them, and listen, I want to be very clear. It was $100. It wasn't anything. I just wanted to make sure I knew what the hell I was doing, and that it got deposited in the right place. And there's no point in going crazy. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing half the time. And so I called them, and they're like, "Oh, okay, this is Mr. Newman." Yeah. Well, can you go through the thing? Do you remember what you were buying? I'm like, yes, I know exactly what I'm buying. Why are we doing this song and dance? I was buying Bitcoin. Why is it such a big deal? And yes, I sounded like this, folks, because I was pissed, and I was in the States, and I couldn't access anything. And they're like, well, we've had problems with that site. Let me get my manager. So then they put me on hold for another 10 minutes, and then they come back on. Mr. Newman? Yes. So do you remember what you were buying? I'm like, yeah, I already told the first guy I was buying Bitcoin. I don't know why this song and dance is going on. And then they're like, well, we've had lots of complaints about that website. Do you remember for sure this is the website? I'm like, yes, I met the guy. Well, how do you know the guy? I'm like, what are you talking about? If I send money on an e-transfer, how do you know I know that person? Well, e-transfer. And I'm like, well, that's all it is. It's an e-transfer. It's an e-transfer. Anyways, it doesn't matter. I'm getting into the nuts and bolts of this thing. I get to the point where finally they unlock my account. Said, okay, just so I'm clear, I'm going to e-transfer this again. Is this going to shut down my account? And he's like, well, I can't be sure. I'm like, you can't be sure that I've just spent half an hour talking about you shutting down my account to this specific one, and I'm telling you I want to send money to it, and you're going to tell me it might get shut down again? Let me tell your audience, what I ended up doing was starting a new account. Shout out to Bow Valley Credit Union and Brett Oland in Alberta, because I just started a new account, and I transferred there. Nothing got shut down, nobody cared, and life carried on. So that is my experience in it, and as soon as I shut it down, I'm like, oh, part of me's pissed. Part of me's like, oh, I'm over the target right now. And let me tell you, folks, when you're over the target, they do weird, crazy things to you. And you're like, you know what? Screw the system. Screw all of you. Just let me do what I want to do with my money and leave me alone. So that's how it went. That's how it's going.
Well, I mean, everybody that gets engaged in Bitcoin has this like learning curve that often is when they encounter the world allowing you to get involved with Bitcoin. My learning story is that I had a client before I went to work for Monsanto. I was running my own company then, and I had a client pay me in Bitcoin. And I didn't know very much about Bitcoin at the time. It was very early. So I left it on the exchange. And for whatever reason, time passed. I shut my company down because I went to work for Monsanto. So I didn't have access to the email that I used to start that account. And I would try and call Coinbase and be like, hey, I don't have access to that email account. This is my stuff. I can prove it. You used my ID. I can show you another government ID. But you couldn't get anybody on the phone. And so they went for... it was actually more than 2 years where I was calling them about once every 2 weeks to be like, hey, what can we do about this, until they finally released it. And when I had it on those exchanges, it was worth virtually nothing. And then by the time I got it back, it was worth a lot more. But that was when I learned that very cold, hard lesson: not your keys, not your coin. So if you don't actually have the wallet that says that you can send the Bitcoin somewhere, then you don't have it. But everybody has to go through these experiences, and far better to go through it now when we're not on a Bitcoin standard.
Have you ever thought, me and you have talked back and forth about this off air of like, talking about Bitcoin journey and different things. I wonder, would there be a way, now maybe this is an offline discussion, but heck, bring your audience in and maybe they can laugh, or maybe they can be like, that's a good idea. Have you ever thought of like doing an online conference style Bitcoin conference for, there's like two sections of this group, okay? Because I went to Bitcoin Rodeo, and Bitcoin Rodeo was so far over my head, I don't even know what I was doing there. But I got to do some interviews with some people, and that was really cool. I had no idea, like, everything they talked about, useless. And I'm sure if somebody were to step into the Cornerstone Forum next year, hopefully when that, I wish I could announce it here, but we haven't quite firmed up where it's going to be. So when they walk in, I assume if they're uninitiated, I'm like taking that experience into my back of my brain. I'm like, how can I make sure that everybody's like enjoying the ride? Because I went to Bitcoin Rodeo and I'm like, man, I don't even know what I was doing there. It was cool. I get it. Yeah, there's some cool people here, but if I wasn't interviewing anyone, it did nothing for me. It didn't help me learn anything about Bitcoin. Now, in fairness, if you're Vance Crowe, or Dave Bradley, who put it on, and you've been in Bitcoin for 10 years, you don't need the ABCs of Bitcoin. And you would probably argue, well, guys, like, just go online and find the 10 YouTube videos. And yet, I'm like, that's another human piece of nature that we just are. Where Vance Crowe did ABCs of Bitcoin and brought out his 10 guys he knows that could explain the nuts and bolts and different things, I'd probably tune in and watch. I probably would. And honestly, if you had me on to ask some questions, I'd probably ask really dumb questions, but it would help the beginner, because the one thing about Bitcoin, I was just shocked at how hard it was, not in the physical realm, but in the mentality around it, to get things to work, and all these little intricacies to make sure you have a wallet. The wallet's got to go here and on and on and on. And me and you have just talked about this offline a lot. I think it'd be an interesting idea for you. Just throwing that out there.
Well, it's a good idea. And in fact, a guy named Jay Curtis, who you may know, I know he listens to your podcast. He lives up in Ontario, and he came down with his wife to do a legacy interview. And he'd originally been like, hey, I want to pay you in Bitcoin. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And he's like, well, I don't really know how to use Bitcoin. And I was like, okay. So what we did was, when he came down the day after his legacy interview, he stayed at the hotel right next door to the studio. And then the next morning when I came in, we recorded him moving Bitcoin from an exchange, which is really easy. That part you wouldn't need help to do. You've signed up with an exchange. You say, I'm going to give you this much money. You're going to give me this much Bitcoin. But when you want to move it to a wallet, that takes a little bit of technical knowledge. So what we did was we got him a Trezor wallet, and we plugged it into his computer, and we filmed us going through each step to get it done. And Jay has since gone back to Canada and sent me money with his Bitcoin. And like, you see, like, like, he got it. But I'm totally with you. There's like, when you've done it, it's not hard. But when you're a white belt, when you're that first day there, every word doesn't mean anything to you. There's so many concepts that you're trying to get your head around that you just need somebody to take you by the hand and walk you through it. I had somebody take me by the hand, And so I'm going to post that video here. Yeah, you prompted me to do it. I'll get it out. It'll be at legacyinterviews.com/Bitcoin. And that video should give anybody that wants to get onto the Bitcoin world, it'll give you an understanding of it. So you've just made me prompted to get this thing done before we enter this podcast.
And the other thing is like the group of Bitcoiners are like extremely friendly and extremely closed off. I don't know if I can make that make sense, because it's like, how can that be? I found them so eclectic, all you fine Bitcoiners, and yet it's like this closed off group. It's a really interesting thing to interact with. And so I just look at it and I go, there's going to be a ton of people that think Bitcoin's a scam. And in truth, where I sit, could be. I mean, it could be. But we all know, I had one of the guys at the conference tell me, yeah, but what do you think of fiat currency? And I'm like, well, it's a bit of a scam. And he's like, right. So what are we talking about here? And I'm like, fair. Okay. So you're going to have a whole bunch of people that got their tail feathers out. I don't know. And yet, as you start to interact with some things, as you're pointing out, you're like, oh, this kind of makes sense. I don't mind this. And maybe there's some things that can start to happen and get the wheels moving and some ideas flowing. And, I look at your audience of probably Bitcoiners mixed with certainly my group of, I got some Bitcoiners on this side, but I would say there's more like me than not, where we're like, I just bought some Bitcoin, don't know what the hell to do with it, but I got some, and my bank account got shut down, and that was a lot of fun, and I had a crazy afternoon, and I still got some, and it's great, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm hanging out here. There might be something there. So I look forward to seeing the video, because I think I'll make sure that I share along with my audience, because I think it'd be much needed. And it always helps when it's somebody and you're like, they're not trying to bamboozle you, right?
Well, Jay was the one that suggested we record it, and I was glad that we did it, and I have just needed a reason to get it up. So that'll be at legacyinterviews.com/Bitcoin. This has been fantastic, Shaun. I know you had a lot going on today. Thank you so much for hopping on. If people wanted to check out the podcast or interact with you more, where should they go?
I think the easiest place is probably just Shaun Newman Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you're an X user, that's where I interact for the most part the most. I'm not a giant social media guy, but Shaun Newman Podcast on Twitter, S Newman Podcast is the handle. And, I would love to hear from your audience if they start listening and they like my stuff. On all the episodes, I have my phone number. They can shoot me a text. I do answer it. I do talk to people from all over the place. And if for some reason you found me through Vance, I would love to hear that too, because I'd love to share with Vance, hey, got a couple, because we've had some people who started listening to you that have come over to me and are sitting in Alberta, and we know exactly who we're talking about. So shout out to Dan, and there's others I should point out. And that's been a really cool experience for me on this side. I'm sure you have your own thoughts on all of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our crossover audiences are fantastic, and even though it makes me a little nervous to be too close to you, because I think one day your government officials are going to come pick you up in an unmarked car and take you away forever. But if that happens, then I'll come up and take care of your family. Don't you worry, Shaun.
I read, and I know Vance is trying to shoo me out of here. So I read, short little story. I read the Gulag Archipelago, and there is an old woman in it who eventually gets to the point of like, just do whatever you got to do. And it's unnerving for the Russian guards, because they're just like, their fear, their bravado. They're like, we're gonna, and it's like, I want to be like the little old woman. So, like, if that's what they got to do, is they got to come. If we get to the point in Canada where they're going to come put a bag over a married man, happily married, with 3 beautiful kids, because he talks to people from all over the planet, and that's the stage, maybe it'll wake some people up. And if that's where my journey takes me, I ain't afraid to go there. I don't want to go there, but I'm not afraid to go there. I'm just like, well, I'm just talking to people. And if that's so offensive to you, well, it's time more people woke up. And so where I sit is like, I don't know how to do this dance any other way than I've been doing it, which is, at times 4 steps backwards and 1 step forward. And at times I feel like I've made a little bit of an advance. I get to talk to the Premier. I get to talk to some other people. I get to talk to this person. I get to talk to that person. I get invited on Vance Crow's show. And if at some point the Canadian government says that guy's got to go, I firmly believe we are in real bad doo-doo. And when they do that, I guess they just best realize I'm not going to sit there and cower and go, oh, poor me. I'm going to be like, well, better finish the job then. And I know that sounds pretty dark, but I'm pretty pissed right now. And frankly, I'm not going to let some, like, Justin Trudeau, got a couple of choice words in my head, intimidate me, my family, my country into a place that we don't want to go, because it is a strange world, and I think you go into that strange world further, and that's your own sort of bag over your head, live in hell that nobody wants to be a part of. So, Vance, I know you warn me about this all the time. I've taken some advice, and other times I think it's just you got to plow straight through the wall and see what happens. Appreciate you having me on, and I hope you continue to do so, and I never become too what's the word I'm looking for here? Hot.
Too hot to handle.
That's right.
Well, thanks, Shaun, and we'll talk again soon.